Today I'll talk about an experience I had yesterday, cataract surgery. I'm old, I'm 65, and my left eye, and my right eye for that matter, but especially my left eye, had become essentially useless because there was a big blur in front of everything I looked at. I couldn't even use my peripheral vision in that eye to try to make up for the loss in the center vision. So a doctor diagnosed cataracts, and they set me up for surgery this week and next. So yesterday was the first surgery. That was the left eye. Next week will be the right eye. And I should preface the rest of this by saying the doctor at this particular hospital, which is Dongsan Hospital in Daegu, Korea, the doctor was fantastic, and the experience was much less of a hell than I expected it to be. But it was still a bit of a hell. But he made the best of it, and he did well, getting me the best possible treatment under the circumstances. Under the circumstances, I'll explain that more in just a couple of minutes. So, let's get started. This is Papa for the boys, and I'll be talking about surgery and trying to maintain the illusion of masculinity when everything around you is breaking down and the pain is filling your mind and your body is so tense that you can barely move. That was my experience yesterday. So I'm pretty strong. I can lift a lot of weights. My body is in good shape, even though I've got a huge belly. I need to get rid of that, and then I will come closer to that Adonis ideal that I want to portray to the world. But when somebody touches either my throat or my eyes, I am very, very sensitive. And so I tend not to be a good patient with anything that has to do with ENT or ophthalmology. Well, cataract surgery falls into the category of ophthalmology. So the task for ophthalmologists when it comes to cataract surgery is to lift up the top of the eyeball just enough that they can slide the old lens out, because the old lens is where the cataracts are, those big blurry spots, and they could replace it with a new lens. And so I was hoping to have a lens that would give me any number of bionic powers, like laser vision, so I could cook my own meals without having to turn on the stove or the oven. So I opted for the premium lens. I was going for that. Surgery started. They immobilized my eye. Well, they didn't really immobilize it, actually. They immobilized my eyelids and the rest of my eye. They deadened the muscle around my eyeball so they can move it around somewhat. They did that by giving me a shot in the back of my eyeball, not through the eyeball itself, but through the skin, with a needle extending about an inch. Excuse me. At least it felt like it extended about an inch into my head to the muscles behind my eyeball. And with that injection, they were able to give a anesthetic that would deaden the feeling and the control over the eyeball for a specific period of time. But it didn't deaden the control completely, because during this surgery, which should have lasted 15 minutes, they were telling me quite often, stare at the light. But since they had actually taken they probably didn't do this, but it felt like they had taken my eyeball out of its socket and were using it to play foosball. And every once in a while, I would see the shadow of somebody raising two hands to the sky and shouting, "Go!" Maybe that was my imagination, but that's what it felt like. So as they were batting my eyeball around the foosball table, they would tell me from time to time to stare at the light, which was okay. I mean, the light was very bright. It was actually painful to stare at, but the more I stared at it, the more I realized that, giving up eyesight in my left eye is not such a bad thing under the circumstances. So I kept on staring, and I expected blindness to happen any moment. It didn't, but the light became 3 separate lights. And then the light was moving around my field of vision, so I was constantly moving my eyeball to keep up with the movement of the light. They had told me to stare at the light, but now that I was following the light around my field of vision, which was probably changing every time they batted it with another foosball player on a stick, they wanted me to stare down. So I tried to stare down to where my nose would be, but since, of course, they had a mask on my face so that I could not even see the room, much less myself, I would stare in the direction of where my nose would be to emulate the experience of staring downward so they could get a better view of my eye. I didn't want to inhibit their foosball playing because, well, they had the knives. They were cutting on my eye from time to time, and you don't want to make someone like that angry or frustrated, so I did exactly what they told me to do. Was it painful? Wasn't supposed to be, but it was from time to time painful, particularly when they would make another incision in order to lift up the flap higher so they could get the lens in and out and that kind of stuff. In and out, I'll explain that in a couple of minutes as well, because this surgery went on and on and on. Well, finally, their foosball game was over, and so the doctor returned his attention and presumably my eyeball to its socket and focused more on getting the surgery done, the cataract surgery. Again, this surgery should have lasted 15 minutes, but it lasted 90 minutes of thinking that any moment this should be done. It wasn't. At some point, he told me, "We're halfway through, congratulations." And that was when I thought it was completely over. And then to find out that it was only halfway done, well, then I knew a little bit about what hell was all about. Hell is not a place of gnashing of teeth. It's a place of not being able to close your eyes and feeling the pains and staring at bright lights and not able to have any control over yourselves and having to give in because you know that the person that has your life and your eyeball in his hands has complete control, and you don't want to make them angry. So 90 minutes of hell ensued. Why 90 minutes? 90 minutes because when they tried putting the premium lens in, the toric lens that would account for my astigmatism and give me perfect vision for distance as well as multifocal distance also for reading, seemed like an ideal result, right? I can be still for 90 minutes to get that kind of result. They had some difficulty getting that lens to set in my eyeball, and they couldn't get it. So finally the doctor whispered in my ear and said, "Mr. Patterson, there's a problem with your eye." And of course I wanted to say, "Yeah, of course there's a problem with my eye. That's why I'm here. Otherwise, I would be out somewhere else playing foosball with somebody else's eye, maybe." But I didn't. Instead, I kept my mouth shut. I might have whispered, "Okay." And so he said, "We have to take that lens out and replace it with the basic lens." The basic lens, which didn't have all the bells and whistles, and it would take away my laser vision. I was unable to be a superhero with the basic lens. But if that's what I had to have for my left eye, that's what I had to have. So I said, okay. I nodded in agreement with a little tiny movement of my head because I couldn't move any more than that. They lifted up the flap of my eyeball and took out the old lens, and that was more painful than when they had inserted it in the first place. Then they waited for what seemed like hours, and I'm sure it was minutes. And that was just long enough for another doctor to arrive, scrub up, and join in to assist on this procedure. Now the two doctors worked on my eye. And together they were able to insert the basic lens in my eye and close it up by the end of 90 minutes. Somewhere along the line, they asked me if I was comfortable. And of course, comfort was the farthest thing from my mind. The place I had to lie down was made for a Korean-sized body, not a American-sized body. And I'm already big for an American, so that space was uncomfortable. I had been lying flat on my back in the same position for 90 minutes, so parts of my back and my bottom were uncomfortable. My legs needed to shift from time to time just so I could keep the circulation going. And of course, they were cutting on my eyeball. There was nothing about this experience that was comfortable from beginning to the end. All I could say is, I'm not sure how to answer that. The doctor chuckled and said, okay, we'll move on. Finally, they finished. And they took all of the tape, all the equipment, all the masking off of my face, and they stuck gauze and all kinds of things on my left eye so I could not move it, could not open it. They covered it with an eye patch to protect it so that I wouldn't touch it or the skin around it with my hands. And they told me, come back tomorrow at 2 o'clock and we'll take off the bandages. I went into a room to recover. I was unsteady on my feet, but one of my friends, my best friend in the world, showed up and she had a sandwich from Subway. I ate that. It tasted so good, but I couldn't eat very much, maybe 3 or 4 bites. I didn't have much trouble eating the cookie, though. The cookie was good, but she saw my big belly, and so she would only allow me to eat about 1/4 of the cookie. And then the 0 calorie or 0 carbohydrates Sprite. I had that, and I drank that down pretty well. Where's all that lead? It leads to this. I'm still waiting until 2 o'clock today to see the doctor. I've been awake since 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm counting every minute until I can get this thing taken care of. I look forward to being able to see in my left eye, but I have very little confidence that that's going to be able to happen. There are too many extensions of time. I don't want to call them complications, but I suppose they were complications during surgery. Anyway, in preparation for this day, I had taught myself to talk to my phone and ask it to play some of my favorite podcasts, like Mark Kaye Saves the Republic, or 47 Daily, or Benny Johnson, or some of the others that would give me some news and opinion on what's happening in America on this day. So the time hasn't passed poorly. I actually have use of my right eye, although I cannot wear my glasses with this huge patch on my left. So I'm left to my limited vision right eye for anything that I want to get done. So I did some cooking. I browned some hamburger and added some tomato sauce that had to be eaten up because it was in an open container. Added some sugar and some ketchup to it. Sugar being what do they call that? Stevia, 0 carb sugar, right? And I put that on a piece of bread and I ate that with some of the leftover salad from Subway. And it tasted delicious. I did that even with only one eye. That might be what I'm left to. We'll see how it goes this afternoon. I'll give you an update by the time I get to the next podcast. Anyway, that's that. Did I act like a masculine hero during this endeavor? Probably not. I don't think I whimpered or cried out at least. But it didn't feel good. It wasn't a great experience. But it's finished. And I still appreciate my doctor for taking such good care of me. All right. Papa, 40 boys.